A word of warning: this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hi, I'm Kitty, and today I'll be aligning the true crime events of Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer, with the skeleton of a detective novel, which includes who is the victim, how were they killed, who will solve the crime, who did it, why did they do it, who tells the story, why should we care? Let's get into it. On January 15th, 1974, BTK targeted his first victims, the Otero family. Joseph was 39, born in Puerto Rico and raised in Harlem, New York. He was an Air Force Master Sergeant and technician in the Navy. His children's early years were spent growing up on military bases around the world. Joseph is described as outgoing and jovial. Julia Marie, 33, is described as caring and loving, with a deep devotion to Catholicism. She was an outgoing mother and would often adopt orphans for Christmas. Joseph, or Joey, was 9. His surviving brother Charlie described him as an outgoing womanizer with a love for sports. Josephine, or Josie, was 11. She loved poetry, drawing, and school. The Oteros moved to Wichita a few months before BTK struck when Joseph took a job with Cook Airfield. Dennis Rader was born in a small town in Kansas and moved to the Wichita house at a young age. The house remained property of the Raders until 2005. By his own account, Dennis Rader developed sexual fantasies about torture and bondage in grade school. He admittedly hung cats and dogs as a child. Dennis was known by his high school peers as a studious lone wolf. Dennis graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 1966 and briefly attended college, only to drop out and join the Air Force at 21. Rader's 4 years on active duty in the Air Force appeared to have been unremarkable. He attained the rank of sergeant and worked in the installation of antenna equipment, among other tasks. Rader received the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the Small Arms Expert Marksmanship Ribbon, and the National Defense Service Medal. He was discharged from active duty in the summer of 1970 and returned to his home. Dennis spent the next 4 years drifting between employment and trolling neighborhoods, where he would scope out neighborhoods. It was during one of his trollings in 1974 when he spotted Julia Otero and her daughter Josie. He was attracted to their beauty and dark hair. He gathered a hit kit, which consisted of gun, cords, knives, and various tools for breaking and entering, and on the early January morning, Dennis Rader was lurking outside the Otero home. When Joey briefly stepped outside, Rader pushed him inside and threatened the family with a knife and gun, claiming it was a robbery. Rader forced Josie and Joey to watch as he murdered Joseph and Julia. He dragged Joseph to the bedroom and wrapped 2 t-shirts around his head and covered it with a plastic bag. He pulled up a chair and watched as the boy struggled while he suffocated to death. He then placed a gag in Josie's mouth, told her she would soon be in heaven with the others, and hoisted her up while masturbating. Rader evidently committed the crime for sexual gratification and claimed that Josie was his Trojan project because Hispanics turned him on. In a later interview, BTK claimed that lust and fame drove him to commit his crimes. Regardless, Rader tidied the home and drove off in Joseph's car, leaving it parked at a grocery store. Charlie Otero then returned home from school with his other 2 siblings to find some immediate red flags. The car was gone, the dog was outside, and the contents of his mother's purse were unusually scattered in the kitchen. Charlie and his siblings found their parents, but were not aware of Josie's and Joey's murders until at the police station. Just a few months after the Otero's murder, Catherine Bright was murdered on April 4th, 1974. Rader had seen her before entering her home and considered her one of his projects. That day, he broke into her home from the porch door and hid in the bedroom. Around 2 p.m., she arrived home, but with her brother Kevin, 19, which Rader was not expecting. Rader came rushing out of the room with a gun pointed straight at them. He told them the same story, that he was a wanted criminal and needed a car, food, and money because he was on his way to New York. He forced the 2 into the bedroom and ordered Kevin to tie his sister's hands and feet. He then took Kevin into the other room and tried to tie him up as well, but was not successful. Kevin got into a fight with Rader, getting very close to taking the gun from him, but Rader was able to get back in a good hold on the gun and shot Kevin in the head twice. After that, he went back to Catherine to finish his project. Catherine also put up a big fight against Rader as he tried to strangle her. He realized that strangling was not going to work, so he started stabbing her in the abdomen multiple times. While that was happening, Kevin Bright was able to escape. He ran a few blocks to his car and drove off in search of help. Sadly, even after multiple emergency surgeries and blood transfusions, Catherine Bright died at the age of 21. Her brother Kevin was in critical condition, but did survive. At his trial, it was revealed that Rader had been disappointed that he had to resort to stabbing her instead of strangling her, commenting, "I know this is a human being, but I'm a monster. I personally think, and I know it's not very Christian, but I actually think it's a demon that's within me. At some point in time, it entered me when I was young, and it basically controlled me." Despite his initial claim that fame and lust were his motive, it's evidently clear that mental illness is a core proponent. BTK's next victim was Shirley Relford. At 24 and a happy mother to 3, Bud, Steve, and Stephanie, Shirley sang in church with a smile on her face. But on March 17, 1977, she was sick in bed when BTK strangled her to death. That day, he was supposed to go after a woman named Cheryl who he had met at a bar, but she was not home. He decided to go down Hydraulic Street and came in contact with a 5-year-old boy named Steve Relford. Rader pulled out a picture of his own wife and son and asked if he knew where they were. The boy said no and went home. Later, Rader knocked on the door and Steve answered the door. He posed as a detective, which let him get inside the house with no problem, including Steve. There were 3 children in the house. Rader turned off the TV and turned down the blinds. The mother, Shirley Vian, came out of the room startled. At gunpoint, he ordered the children to go into the bathroom and locked them inside. He told Vian that he planned on having his way with her. Somehow, he was able to lead her to believe that it wasn't rape and calmed her down by giving her a glass of water and smoked a cigarette with her. While the children were screaming in the bathroom, Rader tied their mother up and strangled her to death by putting a cord around her neck. He left semen on her panties, which were found next to her body. In later years, during his confession, Rader stated that the telephone rang, causing him to leave early, which left the children in the bathroom still screaming for their mother. In this instance, this was a crime of opportunity, with Steve and Steve's mother being the main targets. On December of 1977, Rader became obsessed with stalking 25-year-old Nancy Fox, a single woman who worked 2 jobs and was said to be outgoing and friendly. On December 8th, he cut the phone line and then broke into her modest duplex from the back door. He waited in her home for her to get back from the job at a jewelry store. Since she lived alone, he had no problem surprising her in the kitchen at gunpoint. He told her that he had a sexual issue, and that in order to get rid of that issue, he had to tie her up and rape her. After being allowed to partly disrobe herself in the bathroom, he ordered her into the bedroom. He tied her up and undressed himself. He then started to strangle her. As he strangled her, he confessed to her who he really was and what he had done in the past. Her body was found later with semen on the nightgown and was next to her. The following day, on his way to work for the ADT alarm company, he called the local police department and said, "Yes, you will find a home aside at 843 South Pershing, Nancy Fox, that is correct," and then left the receiver dangling. The police rushed to the house of 843 South Pershing and found Nancy's body strangled to death. The police tried to replay the recording of the voice many times, but never found a match. Early 1978, Rader sent a sarcastic poem called Shirley Locks to the Wichita Eagle newspaper. After the poem was a serious letter, BTK was again taking responsibility for the past 7 homicides. It was written the same way as the letter that was found in 1974, including a Factor X, which was apparently the reason for him to commit these horrible crimes. The next letter that was found was mocking the murder of Nancy Fox, entitled "Oh Death to Nancy," which was mimicking the song "Oh Death." His next victim was his neighbor Maureen Hedge, 53, who was found in May of 1985 after Rader strangled her with pantyhose. He took her body to the church, Christ Lutheran, where he took photos of her in bondage positions before dumping the corpse in a rural ditch. Described as kind, petite, well-dressed, and quiet, Maureen was a dependable second-shift supervisor at a medical center coffee shop. Hedge and Rader lived in the same block for over 30 years in Park City. On April 27th of 1985, Rader was in the middle of a Boy Scout meeting when he stated that he had a headache and needed to leave to get medicine. He went and walked to his car that was near a bowling alley. He went inside and bought a beer. He swished the beer in his mouth, then spit it out, purposely spilling some on his clothing, giving onlookers the illusion that he had been drinking. He called a cab pretending to be drunk and told the driver to take him to Park City. Once he got to Hedge's home, he saw her car and assumed she was home. He cut the phone line like usual and quietly opened the back door to sneak in. He He realized no one was home and waited in her bedroom until he saw a car pull into the driveway. Maureen Hedge and another man walked into the house. Rader waited in the bedroom closet until 1 a.m. so that the man was gone and Maureen had gotten to sleep. Maureen spent the evening eating dinner and playing bingo with her boyfriend. Rader came out of hiding, turned on the bedroom light, and jumped on top of Maureen, choking her to death. Once she had died, he dragged her body outside into the trunk of her car. He drove to the church that he went to regularly, and because he was a trusted member, he had keys to the building. He put black plastic over the windows so no one could look inside. Then he dragged her body to the basement of the church. He photographed the body in multiple different positions before putting her back in the trunk of the car and taking off. He dumped the body in a ditch along a dirt road not far from their home in Park City, where she was discovered 8 days later. BTK's 9th victim was a wife and mother, Vicky Wagirl. At the age of 28, Vicky loved children and enjoyed visiting other mothers about parenthood. When she fell pregnant, she chose to provide childcare from her home. BTK carefully thought out the murder of Vicky, calling it the PJ Project. Rader would routinely walk by Vicky's house and listen to her play piano. At 10 a.m. on September 16th, Rader dressed up as a telephone repairman and knocked on Wagirl's door. She let him into her house, thinking that he was going to fix the phone line. He cut the line and told her that he was going to tie her up. At gunpoint, he forced her into the bedroom and tried to tie her up, but she gave him a fight, causing cuts and scratches on Rader. He got a rope and stopped her fighting by choking her to death. After that, he took photos of her body in different positions, then left, stealing Wagirl's car. Soon after that, Bill Wagirl, the husband, said that he saw his own car driving the opposite direction from the house but could not identify the driver. When he arrived home, he saw his 2-year-old son by himself in the living room. He searched the house for his wife and soon found her on the floor behind the bed in their bedroom. Vicky was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead after a few hours. As this was happening, Rader was disposing of the evidence and parked the Wagirl's car just a few blocks away from the home. He went to his own home, changed his clothes, and once again got away with murder. There was no motive for the murder of Vicky Wagirl. The final victim was Dolores Earline Davis, Dee as people called her. She was born in 1928 in Stella, Nebraska. Raised on a farm, she was an excellent cook who made everything from scratch. In 1961, after 12 years of marriage, a son, and a daughter, Dee and Harry divorced. She was a fun, protective, and devoted mother and grandmother, adored by her family. Jeff, her son, always spoke to his mother on the phone on weekends for hours. When her children and grandchildren gathered for Christmas at her house in 1990, they cried as they watched all dogs go to heaven together. Dee had just retired from her job of over 25 years as a secretary for a fuel company. She was passionate about animal rights issues and enjoyed being a Mary Kay Cosmetics sales consultant. On January 19, 1991, Rader killed Dee in her home after gaining entry by throwing a cinder block through a glass door. Her body was found under a bridge, badly decomposed. Several weeks later, he was going camping with the Boy Scouts over the weekend. He came up with an excuse to slip away from one of the Scouts' meetings. He drove his car to his parents' house to change out of his Scout uniform and into his HIT clothes. He then drove to the Baptist church in Park City to park his car and finish his plan out on foot. Once he got to the Davis house, he waited outside until he saw that she was asleep. He broke into the glass door at the back of the house with a cement block that he found. Dolores came out of her bedroom and found Rader. He used the same line as he almost did every time, saying that he needed money, a car, food, and that he was going to tie her up. He tied her up in the bedroom and strangled her to death. Rader took the body outside and put it in the trunk of her own car. He drove to the lake near Park City and hid the body and evidence under some trees. He drove the car back to the Davis house, wiped it down for fingerprints, and left to go back to the church. He went back to where he hid the body, put it in his trunk, and dumped the body under a bridge in Sedgwick County. Rader then went somewhere to change back into the Scout uniform and returned back to the camp. The following evening, he went back to where he left the body and took photographs of it. Using a remote cord to take his own picture, he posed wearing lingerie he stole from Dee after killing her. The BTK task force found a container in a cabinet with a picture Rader took of himself bound to a chair in a blonde wig and a mask. He also took photos of himself buried up to his neck wearing the mask. It wasn't known if Dee had been abducted or murdered for 13 days. BTK's inevitable downfall came when he sent local media outlets and authorities several letters filled with items related to his crimes, including pictures, a word puzzle, and an outline for the BTK story. He also left packages with clues, including a computer disk that led authorities to Rader's church. Investigators also noticed his Jeep on security tapes of some of the package drop-off areas, and cemented their case by obtaining DNA samples from Rader's daughter. In 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested and charged with 10 counts of murder. Whether it be morbid fascination or utter shock value, the case of the BTK killer makes for a phenomenal detective mystery. Dennis Rader left a cornucopia of clues for detectives to follow, only this wasn't fiction. That's exactly why we should care more. This is real life with real victims. Thank you so much for listening. This was the case of Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to subscribe for more. Bye!